And I'm Nuala Mazrui Helmrich. President Akufo-Addo stays on as he wins the 2020 elections in Ghana, but the opposition rises against his victory, alleging corruption in the electoral process. Detailed right ahead in this edition of the Apex One News magazine. For many legal and economic analysts at the center of the industry, the virtual lack of meaningful regulations governing big tech has been a cause of concern for years. From Microsoft and Google to Facebook and its many assets, Silicon Valley has seemingly operated outside the bounds of federal antitrust laws since the birth of social media platforms as we know them. Those charged with regulating mergers and acquisitions within the context of preserving a competitive economy have given a wide berth to big tech companies, imposing fines that amounted to a gentle wag of the finger against some of the wealthiest corporations in the world. It is unclear whether this hesitancy is spurred by willful negligence or an astonishing lack of appreciation on the federal government's part regarding the sheer strength of power and influence wielded by big tech companies across all sectors of society and around the world. The antitrust lawsuits filed against Facebook this week are the first of its kind since 1998, when Microsoft found itself in the crosshairs of a similar brought by the FTC. Yet, even as a singular economic power in technology, Microsoft's influence was restricted to the economic sector. Facebook, on the other hand, has faced countless accusations over the years of unethical and dangerous practices that have resulted in real-time, quantifiable consequences, impacting the course of politics, social justice, and the rise of extremist and nationalist agendas the world over. 4 years after the presidential US elections in 2016, there have been numerous investigations detailing Russian interference through misinformation campaigns run on Facebook. The tech firm has always insisted that they were not complicit, yet reports compiled through data collected from internal reports and further data analysis clearly shows that Facebook's top executives were fully aware that the platform's algorithms were evolving divisive and polarizing engagement in an effort to attract user attention and increase time on the social media platform. Also in 2016, Facebook's dominance as a news source in Myanmar resulted in extremist violence targeting the Rohingya and triggering a humanitarian crisis in the region that left hundreds of thousands displaced. Faced with having to take account by US Senate committees and foreign governments, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg admitted that the platform had in essence been weaponized against the Rohingya. In a now familiar refrain, he blamed its algorithms and claimed ignorance, promising yet again to create more stringent checks and balances in an effort to provide a more informed user experience and filter out hate-based groups on the platform. But only last week, Amnesty International brought our attention to a new iteration of the danger of Facebook. Perhaps in an effort to absolve itself of complicity in human rights abuses, early last year, Facebook announced it would defer to local laws in countries around the world. In so doing, the platform now aids government cyber trolls and henchmen in identifying and tracking down political dissidents and activists, as was the case in Vietnam just last week, where 70 online activists were arrested and imprisoned for varying acts of peaceful dissent. While the antitrust lawsuits are a step in the right direction in holding tech giants accountable, they don't go nearly far enough. With the advent and accelerated development of psychographic technology, the problem with Facebook and tech companies that capitalize on influencing human behavior is only going to get worse. And governments around the world had better take note by crafting clear and decisive legislation and penalties that shackle the ambitions of any globally monopolized technological power.
This is the Apex One Radio News Magazine. In a groundbreaking legal offensive, the Federal Trade Commission and 48 states filed twin antitrust lawsuits against the giant tech company Facebook on Thursday, alleging that the social media company has engaged in practices that suppress competition, effectively monopolizing the industry.
The government's complaints focus on Facebook's acquisitions of WhatsApp and Instagram and require that the company divest itself of these assets, which are key interests in Mark Zuckerberg's tech empire. The lawsuits come after nearly 18 months of investigation into Facebook's antitrust practices, but are a culmination of years of legal scuffles between the federal and state governments and Facebook.
In addition, German antitrust authorities have also been taking a closer look at the Facebook's practices in that country and announced abuse proceedings into the link between Facebook's virtual reality program, Oculus, and its social media platform. The Federal Cartel Office, Germany's antitrust investigating body, already has another abuse of dominance case against Facebook, targeting its method of compiling user data for ad profiling, which the FCO alleges is hostile to privacy laws. We will be taking a look closer to this story in subsequent editions of the news.
Trump's administration refused Pfizer's offer to purchase millions more vaccines last summer, fanning fears that the U.S. may now face shortages until June 2021 due to the pharmaceutical company's commitments to other countries. The COVID-19 vaccine is, of course, expected to be available here in Ohio on December 15th.
Priority will be given to medical and healthcare professionals on the front line of the pandemic. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, the United Kingdom began its first mass vaccination program, administering the vaccine to the first person ever to receive it after human trials.
In local news, Casey Goodson Jr., a 23-year-old black man, was shot to death by a member of the Franklin County Sheriff's Office working for U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force while entering his home. The task force was looking for violent offenders they suspected were in that neighborhood and have recently claimed that Goodson was waving a gun when they spotted him.
Witness reports say that the victim was entering his house when he was shot and was not carrying a gun. The Franklin County coroner found that Casey died from multiple gunshots and ruled his death a homicide.
The Ohio Attorney General, Dave Yost, has refused to handle the investigation, citing an unexplained delay in the request for assistance from the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. The request was received 3 days after the fatal shooting, and only after the county sheriff's office had already dismantled the scene and dispersed all the witnesses. Yost has referred the case to the Bureau of Criminal Investigations.
Shane Watson, Casey's Goodson's family's attorney, says that witness testimony and physical evidence at this point raised serious concerns about why Casey was even confronted, let alone why he was shot dead by police. The victim's family is calling for murder charges against the sheriff's deputy responsible for Casey Goodson's Jr.'s death.
Last night and continuing today, hundreds gathered in downtown Columbus in protest for Casey Goodson Jr.'s death, calling for the arrest of Deputy Jason Mead, the officer who shot Casey Goodson. The protesters marched from the Franklin County Government Center at 375 South High Street and around downtown before returning to the Ohio State House. Their protest demands included signs of justice for Casey, Black Lives Matter, and defund the police.
This is the Apex One Radio News.
Joe Biden's presidential win was met with numerous legal challenges brought by Trump's administration and other Republican politicians across the country. But the president-elect's path to the White House will now almost certainly advance without obstruction.
This Tuesday marked the safe harbor deadline. That is the date by which all legal challenges at the state level must be completed. After Tuesday, most state courts will likely refuse to hear any cases presenting a legal challenge to the election result, and this essentially means that President Trump's efforts to overturn the election are almost completely exhausted.
On Thursday, the U.S. Supreme Court threw out a Texas lawsuit brought by the Trump administration challenging the election results in Georgia, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. The High Court rejected the case, stating that Texas had no cognizable standing to bring the case.
Meanwhile, Joe Biden has been focused on building his administration, announcing several picks from his cabinet this week, including Xavier Becerra for Health and Human Sciences or Services Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas for Homeland Security, Janet Yellen as the first female Treasury Secretary, and General Lloyd Austin as the first Black Secretary of Defense. Some of these appointments have not been without controversy. However, our political analyst, Rodrick Numia, now joins us with more on the topic. Rodrick, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Kanjo.
Now, the safe harbor deadline is something few are familiar with. Could you shed a little more light on what it means and how it will impact the Biden transition, if at all it will?
It's a practice in the U.S. Constitution where states are allowed to file deadline for states to file any lawsuits, which they have. Different political parties in different states. If they have any tangible lawsuit with evidence, this is a deadline they are allowed by law to file this suit by them, without which courts are likely not to listen to the mitigation again. Because remember, the real day, post-election day on November 3rd, the real election day, it's December 14 when the Electoral College gets to meet NS. So the deadline is passed, and so now most courts, local courts at the state at the level of the states, have the choice or have the discretion not to listen to any litigation that is brought forth to them. NS.
Roderick, how would you assess Biden's transition so far? We know the Trump administration delayed the start of the official transition process by almost 3 weeks. Will this delay have any impact on Biden's preparedness for office come January 20th?
Given any direct consequence right now would be pure speculation, because the Biden team did what they had to do, which was go around the Trump administration. They did not entirely rely on Trump acknowledging the Biden win and start the process. They started the process way before Biden could have access to those transition funds that are made available by the GSA. When Director Moore engaged, the Biden team had been working behind the scenes. So right now we cannot concretely say this is going to happen or this is not going to happen because the transition did not start on time. The Biden-Harris ticket had gone behind the scene and initiated a kind of a mock transition, but without the acknowledgement of the current president, without the support of the GSA, without all the resources they needed. Biden had long cried in the process and said, without him having access to the tools that he should have, many more people might die, which can be preventable. At this time, we don't have any research, we don't have any numbers that would tell us that, oh, it isn't time. And it's
Right. So, as we mentioned earlier, Roderick, some Biden's cabinet picks have been met with resistance or disapproval from his own political tent. Do you anticipate any real fallout within the Democratic Party as a result of Biden's appointments?
So the Democratic Party is a one party as a whole, but within the party, I know back in 2009, we had we had the Tea Party that emerged as a result of some Obama policies in the Republican Party. This time around, we have the left wing, far left ideology people talking about Senator Warren of Massachusetts. We're talking about folks like Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez of New York, and we're talking about people like Ian Omar of Minnesota, whom think that Biden has not appointed enough or a lot of progressive in his administration. So he's having it hard from his own party in the sense that they wanted more people like Andrew Yang to have very significant position in the administration. They wanted people like Bernie Sanders to have, because they are very, very progressive. They are not centrist. But Mr. Biden is a centrist in the Democratic Party, which is the reason why, one, he won the election. That's why some Republicans were able to cross over and vote for him. But two, Mr. Biden wants to nominate people that the Senate is going to confirm, because at this point, depending on what happens in Georgia in January, Mitch McConnell gets to keep the Senate. And that means that a lot of these nominees are going to go through the Senate. So Biden is looking at a situation where the Republican majority in the Senate is not going to have a problem voting to confirm these nominees. But if you take people with far left ideologies, it's going to be stalling in the Senate, because how do you get, the Republican senators will represent folks in Oklahoma, Tennessee, and those typical Trump country to vote for a far left progressive? So Biden is under fire from his own party because he's not doing what the left wing of his own party is doing. But if you're somebody that are looking at the entire process in the eyes of Biden, you want to nominate people that are going to be confirmed by the Senate. And as it stands, the Senate is majority Republican pending the result of the Georgia election. Ennis.
And speaking of the president-elect being under fire, his cabinet appointments so far have been more diverse than previous administrations. They include women and Latinos, but many are now questioning whether he will in fact ensure that the makeup of his cabinet will represent the diversity of perhaps his largest bloc of supporters, and that's Black voters. What is your opinion? Do you think that he will respond to public pressure by tapping more qualified Black progressives for high-level cabinet positions?
Which he's done so already, because if you look at his defense secretary, now the nominee, it's a Black retired general. If you look at his, those are high-level cabinet position. I mean, defense is pretty high up there. If you look at it, some of the president is the Secretary of Defense that is charged with that task. So that's a high-level cabinet position. And
right.
Everybody needs to understand. I know now this sounds like my opinion, is that Joe Biden is the president of the United States of America. They're trying to put him in the same box where Obama was put in, where he's not doing enough for the Black people. Obama was not the president of Black people. Obama was the president of the United States of America. Joe Biden is the president of the United States of America. Some white voters will feel like they're left out in as much as majority is white, but you're paying so much attention to the minority group. What about us? Biden has been in Washington for 47 plus years. He knows how the game works. I believe that he's going to do enough to please most of the people, but he's not going to do enough to please everybody.
So you think he will have a very diverse cabinet once he's done?
I believe so. I believe so, because at this point we already have a Latino who is nominated for the Attorney General of the United States. That's a high-level cabinet position.
That's right.
We already have 2 Black people, a female and a male, in his cabinet. And if you look at the composition of the communication team in the White House or in the president-elect's potential cabinet, it's primarily female and primarily Black women. You're looking at Simone Sanders, you're looking at a bunch of other ladies in there who are very smart and talented, are up to the task. So he's doing a good job, but unfortunately, he cannot please everybody. It's going to be a true representative of the United States of America, but it's not going to please everybody. That's for sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Roderick Numia is a political analyst. I'm a news team member of the Apex One Radio. Roderick, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you, Ernest.
And this is the Apex One Radio News Magazine.
Speaking to Congress after yet another failed COVID-19 relief bill, Governor Mike DeWine issued a statement calling for the urgent approval of bipartisan coronavirus relief package before Washington breaks with a holiday recess. Many CARES Act programs have run out and more are set to expire before the end of the year.
He expressed his gratitude for both local and federal assistance in the face of the pandemic, but made clear that continued investment and substantial aid is essential to alleviate the burden caused by the pandemic on Ohio workers and families, businesses and industries, healthcare professionals, and of course, schools.
Meanwhile, Ohio is getting closer to the public distribution of the coronavirus vaccine. Unlike inoculations for other diseases, neither the Pfizer nor Moderna vaccines use a live virus. Instead, both vaccines use messenger RNA, more commonly known as mRNA, which is a molecule that is engineered to give instructions to cells within the body, teaching your cells to fight the virus. Both vaccines have shown a promising efficacy rate above 90%.
Earlier this week, reports that President Trump refused an offer from Pfizer to purchase millions more vaccines fanned fears about a possible shortage of the vaccines until June 2021. The pharmaceutical company has confirmed that they did, in fact, make that offer on multiple occasions last summer, but were rebuffed.
The Trump administration is expected to sign an executive order under their America First initiative that could ultimately force Pfizer and any other company who received U.S. aid in bringing the COVID-19 vaccine to market to prioritize America above other nations. Coming up next, Dr. Hassan Teta, Associate Professor of Surgery at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences, will join us for a more in-depth discussion of the coronavirus pandemic, vaccine expectations on the course of this health crisis.
Welcome to Apex One News Magazine. Here with us now is Dr. Hassan Teta, adjunct faculty at Howard University College of Medicine and Associate Professor of Surgery at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. Welcome to the program, Doctor.
Thank you.
Now, we've seen a huge spike in the last couple of months in both coronavirus hospitalizations and deaths across the country. To what do you attribute this? Is it simply a matter of pandemic fatigue, or are there any other factors at play?
That's a very good question. The reason for the spike is multifactorial, Ernest. It is a combination of the thing you mentioned, I think, that we all suffering from, which is pandemic fatigue for sure. And so when that is, sort of coming into play with the psyche of many of us that have been locked down for many months, it's just that the desire and the fear and all of those things that would have someone exercise the greatest precautions have just, not have been as effective. So the wearing of masks, the social distancing, those things I think may have not been, as effective or not being practiced as much. But there are other factors. It's definitely getting colder here, certainly in the States. And so all across the country, people are now doing many more of their activities indoors. That brings people together and much closer and typically without masks inside. And they're next to each other, and the virus is transmitting that way. The other factor I think is also potentially playing a role is the sense of security. We have great news. We have a vaccine. There is hope on the horizon. You see the light at the end of the tunnel. This will ensure that the masses of us will be protected from transmitting the disease to others and having protection ourselves. However, there is a long sort of process between the actual availability of the vaccine, the approval of the vaccine, the proven efficacy and safety of the vaccine, and then when actually the majority of the population receives the vaccine. And so there's a bit of a time lag there. And so that just because the vaccine is available to us, there is still a bit of a process that will need to be implemented before the majority of the population actually benefits from the fact that the vaccine is now introduced into the population, and we have now developed an effective resistance, if you will, to COVID. So I think those are all the factors that are contributing to the spike. And then, one last thing that I would just say that it's perhaps a bit obvious, but many more people now have been infected and have been exposed to COVID. And so those many more people now can expose and introduce COVID to many more people. And that is also contributing to the spike.
Dr. Tedder, we know that the available vaccines do not use a live virus to combat the illness, but rather a molecule called mRNA or messenger RNA. Can you briefly explain exactly how mRNA works to make the vaccine effective?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question as well. You know, this is, I think, a great testament to the advances of modern medicine, to quote that term that's often used. And what you alluded to it actually before when you were talking about the mRNA, which yes is short for messenger RNA. We all have a sort of a DNA in our cells that many people are aware of in the nucleus. What this technology is allowing us to do, which is quite different than maybe some of the traditional sort of vaccine technologies, is as opposed to introducing, like you said, live or attenuated actual particle or virus or bacteria that will give us an sort of immunity through vaccines. What we're doing here is engineering a messenger RNA, which will give the cells in our body the instructions to create a protein. The protein, believe it or not, many people have seen pictures of the coronavirus depicted with the crown, and that's how the corona sort of virus was named, because of the way it looks. That spiky protein there that is notoriously kind of attributed to the coronavirus is a very specific kind of protein. And so the mRNA that's introduced through this vaccine and this new technology is creating that protein.
I see.
And what that does is when that protein is created, we and our immune system develop antibodies to that particular protein. Now, the ingenuity there is really novel, because what happens now is that when someone has been given the mRNA vaccine, the body created this protein, the body created antibodies to that protein, which is that little spiky, characteristic protein on the coronavirus. Now they've been exposed to real coronavirus, and they have antibodies to that spiky protein, you see? And so now that spiky protein that the coronavirus has is now going to be attacked by the antibodies that we have created, sort of through this ingenuity and sort of this sort of delivery of an mRNA that gave us the ability through the cells and through our own immune system and our natural immune system to develop the antibody to that protein. And then, of course, your very powerful immune system that we all have, and that's why keeping very healthy and having a robust immune system and doing all the right things to make sure that stays healthy and stays strong will then attack the coronavirus and destroy it and ideally keep you from getting harmed and certainly progressing down the path of having complications and all the morbidity and mortality that we've been seeing that folks have been suffering from.
Right. On Thursday, the Food and Drug Administration approved Pfizer's vaccine for use in an emergency owing to a new record set for COVID-19 deaths in just a single day, that number being 3,000. Right. How does this differ from how the vaccine's use was initially approved?
Well, the vaccine's approval has been rigorously, I think, adjudicated through the system in place by the FDA. And I think we can be assured that the FDA is doing all they can to approve the vaccines candidates through the process that they have. And there are phases, and there is a lot of information there that I think that many people, I think, that have the questions should seek out on the FDA website and, of course, on the CDC website, because they have great detail laying out exactly how the vaccines are being approved, what the process is, and all of the safety measures that are being put in place to ensure that the vaccine is both safe, effective, and will contribute to mitigating the risk of exposure to COVID-19, which is what vaccines are intended to do. The approval, obviously, as you mentioned, the emergency use approval, there are some circumstances, and again, those are very well outlined as well, that give certain candidate drugs, in this case, the vaccine for COVID-19, a little bit of an accelerated process to get to an approval. and those are taken into consideration as well. However, it is really important for the population to know, specifically because this is such a critical time for us, that the safety and the efficacy, those things are not being accelerated in terms of their adjudication and the things that they're looking at. What is being accelerated is some of the time that it takes to make some of these decisions and sort of trying to get to the a little bit more of a rapid decision-making process, so that the drug can become, the vaccine in this case, could become available and more readily available and accessible to the population.
And exactly how will the vaccine be administered? Is it a single or multiple injections, an IV? And are there any potential side effects to receiving the vaccine?
Sure, that's also a very good question. The standard administration at this point is going to be intramuscular, so into the muscle, and depending on the patient and circumstances specific to those patients, there'll probably be an intramuscular injection. At this time, at least some of the early candidate vaccines are calling for 2 vaccinations, meaning that you'll have to have the first initial vaccine and then over a period of time a second one, and that's to just sort of boost your immunity and the response to the COVID-19 virus, and to give you a much more robust protection against the virus.
Now, there's been a lot of speculation as well as some conspiracy theories about how and to whom the coronavirus will be distributed first. Yeah. Aside from health care workers at the front lines of this disease, how will healthcare officials go about determining who gets priority in receiving this immunization?
Very good question, Ernest. I think that, just overarching guidelines, I think, are going to obviously look to protect those that are, most vulnerable. So obviously those in healthcare, myself and others that are taking care of patients on a daily basis, potentially even first responders that are out in the public and also interacting on a daily basis with those that may be potentially sick and impacted and affected by the virus. So those folks, like you said, are going to be prioritized. And then I think, a lot of these decisions are going to be made by the state health officials, because they in fact have a good sense of who in their populations are vulnerable, who in their populations are more susceptible, and who in their populations are at highest risk. And then I think that is how the prioritization of the vaccine administration is going to be determined and again, sort of planned out from a strategy standpoint. So first responders, most likely the elderly and those that are infirmed after that, because obviously if they get sick and infected with COVID and they come down with the virus, their risk of very serious consequences, morbidity, mortality is going to be significantly higher than those that are perhaps younger, healthier, have much more robust immunity and are just a lot stronger, just physically and sort of health-wise.
Even before the coronavirus, vaccinations had become somewhat of a controversial topic, despite irrefutable scientific evidence demonstrating the necessity and efficacy of vaccinations in controlling and even eliminating diseases. A significant portion of the population remained skeptical, even hostile to receiving any kind of immunization. What is your opinion? How do we achieve herd immunity and eradicate the coronavirus if there are still members of the herd who simply refuse to be immunized?
Again, very good question. No simple answer here. I'll just be very frank with you. As a healthcare professional, the science and the history and the study of history of medicine, as I like to, believe I'm a pupil of, and one that really loves just the history of pandemics and how they have fundamentally changed society. I have seen that the vaccines in some of the diseases that we have been successful in eradicating in the world, in the planet, whether they be things like yellow fever or they be smallpox, these diseases ravished populations. They cause tremendous harm and morbidity and mortality and cause so much human suffering. And we take for granted that those are no longer diseases that impact us and harm us. But yet it's because of vaccines, it's because of this great technology, it's because of the novels of modern medicine that has allowed us to live with these once deadly diseases now in a thing of the past. COVID-19 now represents one of those so new and emerging novel threats that we have, and vaccines will be one of the ways that we do return to some normalcy. At the same time, there is an irrefutable, as you mentioned, group of individuals that for many reasons, and some of them are quite very valid, that you just can't discount, that will not feel comfortable or be encouraged or motivated to seek vaccination. So I think it's going to be really up to people like you and your show and your platform to educate, to provide as much information so that people feel comfortable with the decisions that they need to make, not only to preserve their own health, but to sort of have their play their part in preserving the health of the population and helping us to get through this very challenging and difficult time. So I think it's going to take a combination of education and a lot of public health dissemination of the facts, and people doing their own internal, sort of soul searching for what it is that they would like to do in this very critical time. Be protected, protect their families, protect others and their neighbors, and so we can get to a place where we don't have this high risk of people getting very sick and ultimately, unfortunately, dying.
Dr. Hassan Teta is an associate professor of surgery at the Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences. Dr. Wacho, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
This is the Apex One News Magazine. Rashida Jones made headlines this week as the first black woman to head a major cable news network. On February the 1st next year, she will succeed Phil Griffin as MSNBC's network president. Mr. Griffin led the network for the past 12 years. Mrs. Jones has been with the NBC Universal for 7 years, starting off as an executive producer and working her way up to her current position as Senior Vice President of NBC News and MSNBC.
She has an exemplary record in her relatively short tenure at the news network, helping to oversee some of the biggest news stories in the past year, including coverage of the protests following George Floyd's murder, the coronavirus pandemic, and the presidential elections. This is NBC Universal News Group Chairman Cesar Conde's first major executive shakeup since taking the helm at the network in May. Sources report that one of his first directives addressed diversity with an aim to make 50% of the staff at the network women or people of color over the coming years.
Brandon Bernard, a federal prisoner in Indiana, has been executed by lethal injection. He was executed on Thursday night and becomes the 9th victim of the death penalty this year in a rare series of executions carried out during the so-called lame duck period following a presidential election. 4 more executions are planned before President-elect's inauguration in January 2021.
Bernard was a teenager in a Texas street gang when he was convicted of his involvement in the disposal of the bodies of a couple from Iowa who were murdered by members of his gang. His execution revived calls to abolish the death penalty across the country, with progressive members of the Senate like Bernie Sanders, Ayanna Pressley, and Ilhan Omar denouncing the death penalty as state-sanctioned murder.
Listening to the Apex One Radio News magazine. Melissa McFadden is a 24-year Columbus Police Force veteran who recently released her memoir titled Walking the Thin Black Line. In it, she chronicles her experiences as a black police officer and the culture of systemic racism that she says she was forced to endure within the police division. In 2018, Ms. McFadden filed a lawsuit against the division, alleging racial discrimination that is currently pending in federal court. She now joins us to speak about her book. Welcome to Apex One Radio, Ms. McFadden. We are happy to have you on the show. So, you were a member of the police, the Columbus Police Force for 24 years. That is an incredibly long period of time, considering what you alleged in your book. First, what motivated you to stay that long under those conditions, and what finally prompted your departure?
Well, first, I want to tell you thank you for having me on your show, and I'm speaking to you as a private citizen. I'm actually not retired. I'm still actively working for the Division of Police. And I've been there for 24 years. In May, it'll be 25. What's motivated me all these years is like when I was 14 years old, it was a dream of mine to be a police. So when I finally got on Columbus, I wasn't raised to be pushed around pretty easy. And so I just continued to fight over the years to be in that space. It's very difficult being in that space, but I wasn't going to just let anybody push me out, because this is something that I always wanted to do. So between my faith in God and my upbringing by my mother, that motivated me to stay, on top of the fact that they tried to change things from the outside and it doesn't work. So somebody needs to be on the inside and try to make the change from within. So that's why I stay, and I continue to stay.
Ms. McFadden, you've stated that in publishing your book, you were concerned about the potential for retaliation. Have your fears been confirmed? And if not, is that something you still worry about?
Well, since I stood up the last time I stood up for a female Black officer and helped her file a discrimination lawsuit in 2017, I've had 8 different investigations filed on me internally.
Wow.
8. And right now there's still like 3 pending, but I haven't received any discipline. They're just frivolous investigations.
Right.
They use the Internal Affairs Bureau as a retaliation tool. So to have 8 investigations on you in 3 years, that's a bit much.
Yes.
But at the point where I'm used to it, because I know I haven't done anything wrong. So they keep putting these investigations on me, but they never give me discipline because I'm not doing anything wrong. It's just to cause me extra stress.
Right.
And it continues to put me on these investigations so that I will feel stressed out and eventually want me to quit or quit speaking out. It's their way of getting back at me for exposing what's going on inside. And so I expected it. I was concerned about it because I know how much they are corrupt and how many people in the division are corrupt and that they would make stuff up. But God has protected me this far, so I continue to ask him for protection. And I have a lot of people praying for me. So that's what keeps me there. So I'm still concerned about retaliation, but it's an ongoing thing that they're constantly doing. So I'm kind of getting kind of used to it. I guess I'm in this space, and it's just the way it is. I guess it's becoming just the way it is.
Wow.
Now, the Columbus Dispatch, which is the city's leading daily newspaper, reported in one of its editions that you feel that the voices of Black police officers have been missing from discussions on racism. What do you think Black officers can contribute, especially given that the public tends to view all officers, regardless of color, as part of the problem in policing their communities?
I think what Black officers can contribute, we can help people understand what's going on and why we have these police involved shootings across the country, what it's like to be inside. Because of the retaliation, and we don't speak out because we know as soon as we speak against what the police is doing, we're going to be the targets of that same retaliation. So we don't speak out at all because we have children, we have our livelihoods, we have things like that we don't want to lose. But we can talk about how the police department indoctrinates you from the beginning of the academy on through your career to look at Black people as targets, to look at Black people as criminals, the things that they show us in training. That my belief is the implicit bias, which is a subconscious belief in different stereotypes about race, is based on exposure to your environment, and exposing officers in general to the environment of policing, how they do it now. When you're shooting at targets, the targets are all Black. You get more points for hitting the Black part of the target as opposed to the white part of the target. Wow. They recently changed it in the last 10 to 15 years, but years and years prior to that, it's always been a Black silhouette that we're shooting at.
Wow.
Just those little things that you don't even think about is in your mind, and it subconsciously makes you think a certain way about a race. Right. So when we're in training and they're showing you only examples where Black suspects are getting arrested, you eventually start to see it's just thinking that it's just Black suspects all the time that you need to be worried about. Yeah. So those little things that they do in training and firearms, just overall, that slowly seeps that implicit biases in your head. I don't believe that the white officers per se are shooting Black men, unarmed Black men, just because they're Black on purpose. I think it has a lot to do with the implicit bias that they're not aware that they're being exposed to through their indoctrination, through this profession of policing. That's my thought on it. And that's why, because there's too many of them happening, and all of them can't be just blatantly racist. It could, but I just don't believe they're just blatantly racist. I believe the indoctrination has caused implicit bias. And because of that implicit bias is subconscious to them, they don't realize they've been trained to look at Black males as the enemy. And as a result, Black males are dying at the hands of police. So that's why I think that our voices need to be heard, because we are in there, and my son's Black, my husband's Black. I have a vested interest in the Black community. And so our voices need to be heard because we have a lot to say. We're just afraid to say it because we're also targets ourselves.
In response to the release of your book, Police Chief Thomas Quinlan and Mayor Ginther both acknowledged that there is racial discrimination, but insisted that they were working towards eliminating it. Now, your book describes a long culture of systemic racism in the Columbus police force. So what is your reaction to these statements? Are you satisfied that the city is in fact working towards equality and diversity within the police force? And back to your answer concerning implicit bias, are you seeing any implicit bias in training? Are you seeing any changes there?
Well, let's talk about the working towards diversity and equality. It's not enough to work towards it. It should not be tolerated at all. Mm-hmm. We need strict, impactful changes now. Mm-hmm. We don't need to wait till you work towards it. We need it done now. You know what needs to be done, and just do it. There shouldn't be any issues. because there's racism going on actively inside, and because we are discriminated against and mistreated inside, I believe it directly influences and affects how officers treat the Black community. So if they can do it to us, and we're supposed to be blue, and they can treat us unfair, mistreat us, just give us unfair assignments, treat us unequal, lie on us, put investigations on us, do all these things to us and not get in any trouble. There's no accountability. What are they doing to our citizens that are Black, that don't have the resources to hire lawyers and things of that nature? So it's not enough just to work towards it. We need it to stop now. We need this discrimination to stop. We need rules in place that's going to prevent it from happening. And we need officers that do participate in it to be held accountable. That's what we need. And this working towards it is not good enough. It's not good enough. Any racism that affects one, it affects us all. That's right. So as for your second question, we do get implicit bias training.
Okay.
So we actually get training by other officers. But other officers train us on implicit bias and what it is. In the last few years, we've had that training.
Okay.
But it hasn't changed the fact of all the little symbols and exposures that we're getting, that you're indoctrinated in from the time you hit the academy all the way through your career. It hasn't changed. Now, like I said, they changed the target. The target's now gray. But that's been like only 10 years or so ago.
Yeah.
So all these other little symbols and things that they do that indoctrinates us to believe, the videos, they're doing better about the videos. I've seen more than just Black people now in the videos, but it needs to be done. Some things need to be done differently. We just need a whole system change.
Yeah.
Reality.
Melissa McFadden is a book author, publisher of Walking the Thin Black Line, which was launched recently in Columbus. Now, everybody needs to know how Black officers feel about being Black and blue. Now, Melissa, this is a sentiment you expressed back in September when your book was first released. So tell us, what did it feel like being Black and blue?
Well, the thing is with us, especially when it comes to George Floyd protests, we're standing on the front lines as Black officers. And actually, the protesters were actually attacking us because we were in the system and we were Black and we were doing our job. So it's difficult because when you're inside the division, if you do say at one point, if I was to say Black Lives Matter, they would probably investigate me just for making that statement. I wasn't allowed to say that statement until after the George Floyd protests. We were really allowed to say it. But they could say Blue Lives Matter all day long and hang up posters and things like that. But if I was to do it, there would be some kind of retaliation or pushback for me. So we've always had that gag order or that thing where we just had to stay on the side of blue because it's a culture of cover up there. And we always have to stay on the blue side and never go to. And so when you're on the blue side, if you're on the blue side, then the Black community looks at you like you're like the blue side. So you're kind of stuck in the middle of being Black and blue. So, you can't, it's like, because they're opposite of each other, even though they shouldn't be, but that's how it's posed.
Yeah.
You can't, they're opposite of each other, blues against Black, because the Black community don't trust the police. And you got a lot of police officers killing unarmed Black men across the country. So it's like a conflict there. And when you're Black and you're blue as well, it's just a difficult place to be in. It's a difficult place to be in. That's what I would say with that.
Melissa, the defund the police movement has been gaining support over the last couple of years, especially since the protests following George Floyd's murder this summer. But it's also been a controversial movement. It calls for diverting funds from the police and investing them instead in social and public service programs. Now, the city of Columbus allocates 1/3 of its nearly $1 billion to the police. As a police officer, where do you stand on defunding the police?
I actually support defunding the police. I think there's a lot of things that we do now that we did not do when I came on. A lot of mental health things we do. We are carrying Narcan for people with overdose. That overdose, we go and we take the Narcan and actually give the people the Narcan during an overdose. We have defibrillators that we run on people that have heart attacks. So different things we're doing that I don't feel that's the traditional policing and that we should be doing. And I think the monies used for those services and those things that we are doing can be taken away and redistribute it to another agency so they can take that and do those things. I think if you have a non-aggressive mental health call, we shouldn't have to show up to that as police officers. Send some social workers out there. Send people out there that are specialized in that particular thing, like mental health. You know, we have officers specifically trained, like they have extra training. I'm not saying they're specifically trained, but they have extra training. But social workers, mental health professionals, that's what they do every day.
Yes.
So let them respond out. Take that funding that you use for that particular type of program, take that funding and put it over there to these mental health services agencies and let them respond. Because we're doing a lot of things that are not police related any longer. Right. That should be handled by social workers. Like when we come out on domestic violence scenes, we have to do a lethality assessment on the victim that's whoever, the male or female that got beat up. We have to ask them a series of questions and check the list. And if they meet so many of these check boxes, then we refer them to an agency to get help. Why not have a social worker come out there and do that so we can take care of the criminal aspect of it, and then they can take care of the social work aspect of it. Okay. We're just doing too much. Yeah.
Melissa, just before you go away, what message or advice would you give to young Black police cadets who are poised to begin serving as members of the Columbus Police Force?
So I want to make sure my book is not to deter people from getting on a division. The more minorities we have, the better. I guarantee you many things don't happen just because I show up on the scene. That could happen. So the more minorities we have on the department, the better. This book is to let them know what they to expect when they come in. It's also a way for me to expose the division so I can change the system for the better. So when they come in, they don't have to experience what I experienced. Nobody told me these things. So that's what the book is for. And I would say to them, we need you. Don't get discouraged. We're actively trying to make change happen, making a better environment for you. So come on, we need you to sign up because the only way you can change the system is from within. So we need them there, and just use the book so you can come in with your eyes open.
Well, thank you, Ms. McFadden. Your book is a valuable resource for anybody caught at the intersection of being Black and blue. Thank you so much for coming to our show, and I wish you you enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
This is the Apex One News Magazine. The National Museum of African American Music has finally set a date for its grand opening. Initially set to open earlier this year, the museum was forced to postpone due to COVID-19 restrictions. The long-awaited museum will open its doors to the public on Martin Luther King Day, that is January the 18th, 2021. The 56,000 square feet facility in Nashville, Tennessee, will house exhibits and artifacts tracing the history of the significant contribution of African American musicians in the music industry. Our reporter, JC Prysock, now joins us with the first of a two-part report on the evolution of African American music and the icons that blaze the proverbial trail. JC.
Defining the African American impact on American music is a near impossible task. African American influence are so essential to American music that one could argue there would be no American music without them. Historically, we can trace the evolution of African American music to the transatlantic slave trade. When the forced migration of thousands of Africans ended in the American colonies, each man, woman, and child carrying the rich and malicious heritage of African song and dance, it was these sounds that echoed through the plantations of their new home, consoling and strengthening them in the face of their adversity, evolving as they passed from one to another generations to come. Many of the musical instruments that accompanied early African American music, like the banjo and the drums, have their predecessors in the traditional instruments of African music. During the Reconstruction and Jim Crow era, the African American music truly began to evolve beyond its African origins. It's spurred by European influences in the broader Americas. African American musicians, with the freedom to create and perform beyond the borders of their enslavement, took to the stage, and a musical heritage true to the journey and culture of African Americans began to take shape. The earliest rendition of musical genres attributed to African American cultures is the blues. Pioneered by the great Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith, the blues are a musical genre that spawned countless variations for decades to come. From the Memphis blues to the Mississippi blues, country blues to the electric blues. Following close on the heels of the blues was jazz, a sound that was big and bold as the blues was as personal and intimate. Characterized by big bands, replete with a huge array of instruments, jazz, the African American answer to the European opera. And like the blues, jazz left the room for a slew of variations that gave birth to indisputable greats that crossed color lines and international borders, cementing African American musical contributions as the gold standard in the industry. Names like Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, Dixie Gillespie, and Count Basie. In modern times, African American music continued to dominate the global music industry. Rap and hip hop emerged almost simultaneously and immediately took the world by storm. Rap sprung from inner city neighborhoods in a gritty poetic verse that struck back at the systems of social and economic oppression. Bearing down on African American neighborhoods across the country was quickly adopted around the world. We'll bring you the conclusion to this report next week. Reporting live for Apex One News Magazine, I am Jessie Prysock.
Jessie Prysock there with our arts and culture news. On to foreign news. UK and Russian scientists are teaming up in a plan to attempt combining Oxford's AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine with Sputnik V, the Russian vaccine approved for emergency use in August of this year. The collaboration hopes to improve the strength and efficacy of a coronavirus vaccine or create a longer-lasting immunity to the virus. The partnership is in its early stages, but it has already been determined that the drug trials will take place in Russia.
Argentina may soon pass a bill to legalize abortion in the predominantly Catholic country. The affirmative majority vote in the lower house of Argentina's parliament was received by large crowds gathered outside the Senate in Buenos Aires, celebrating a moment long fought for by women's rights activists. Opponents of the bill were joined by calls from the Roman Catholic Church asking the Senate to remember the meaning of respect for life. The bill must still pass the upper house of Parliament and the Senate before becoming law.
Morocco has agreed to a deal aimed at normalizing ties with Israel, making it the sixth Arab country to do so since August. As part of the agreement brokered by the Trump administration, the U.S. agreed to recognize Morocco's sovereignty over the Western Sahara region, a disputed territory off the coast of Mauritania that has been a cause for conflict between the two countries since 1975.
And the Ghanaian presidential and parliamentary elections came to an end this Monday, with President Akufo-Addo claiming victory over his main opponent, opposition leader John Mahama, with 51% of the votes at the close of the polls. Post-election violence erupted after the announcement of the results, with the opposition alleging corruption in the electoral process. Ghana is known for its peaceful transitions of power, relying on the courts to adjudicate post-electoral complaints. The current situation marks a rare deviance from the country's usual state of affairs.
This is the Apex One News magazine. And on to sports. First held in 1913, the FIFA World Cup was only played in Africa for the first time in 2010. 8 years later, South Africa became the first African country to host the tournament. Prior to hosting the World Cup, Africa had blamed the football governing body for preventing the continent from benefiting from the fallout of the highly rated sports event that takes place every 4 years. So, after hosting the World Cup, did South Africa enjoy the development always set to come along with it?
To answer this question, Solomon Atta, our South Africa correspondent, is now joining us from Johannesburg. Solomon, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Solomon will definitely be joining us in a short while. And when he comes on, he will be talking about South Africa 10 years after hosting the World Cup in 2010 as the first African country to do so. And so has South Africa enjoyed the development set to accompany every World Cup hosting? That is the question Solomon will be answering on the news when he joins us from South Africa. Apparently, we're having technical issues reaching out to Solomon, who is in Johannesburg. So we are hoping that we will be able to have him join us. But if that is not the case, then we'll probably have Solomon next week in the next edition of the Apex One News magazine. Join us from that end. Okay, so before we go away, in a groundbreaking legal offensive, the Federal Trade Commission and 48 states have filed twin antitrust lawsuits against tech giant Facebook. In this edition of the news magazine, we heard that the lawsuit follows allegations that the social media company has been engaging in practices that suppress competition, effectively monopolizing their industry.
In international news, we covered the fact that President Akufo-Addo has been elected to serve another 4-year term in Ghana, and the result is already being contested by the opposition, alleging corruption in the electoral process. Ghana is known for its peaceful transitions of power, relying on the courts to adjudicate any post-electoral complaints after the election. The current situation marks a rare deviance from the country's usual state of affairs.
And in sports, we will be back with South Africa 10 years after hosting the World Cup in 2010. That will be in next week's edition of the Apex One News magazine, during which time Solomon Atta will paint the picture of that country after hosting the World Cup.
And with that, we come to the end of this edition of the Apex One News magazine, which was made possible by you, our viewers, and the collaboration of our entire news team. We will be back at the same time next week for the next edition. Ernest, goodbye, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you so much, Noella. Goodbye. Have a fantastic rest of the weekend.
You too.